Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class from HowStuffWorks.com.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Katie Lambert.
And I'm Sarah Dowdy.
And Sarah and I, as usual, were talking about books today, and I'd read The Lost City of Z over the summer, which, if you haven't picked it up, is amazing. It's all about this search in the Amazon for what may or may not be a mythical city. I'm not going to tell you the answer.
It's something we might actually want a podcast on in the future, but it got us talking about how the search for lost or mythical cities sometimes unearths a lot of real stuff, and we actually do some real exploring. And one of the best examples we thought of for this is the golden city of El Dorado. The streets were supposed to be paved in gold, and obviously all the gold-hungry explorers went looking for it and consequently mapped a lot of South America. And another one was the fabled Seven Cities of Cibola, which was supposed to have castles in the air. And in the hunt for this, explorers mapped a lot of the southwestern United States.
And it's not true that space is the only unexplored frontier, really, because according to NOAA, 95% of the underwater realm is still unexplored. So all you adventurers out there, get out your scuba equipment. So today we're going to talk about another lost city, Atlantis.
Yeah, that NOAA fact probably should have clued you in.
So Atlantis starts back with Plato. He's the first real primary source we have for any of this. And he'd started on what was supposed to be a trilogy of dialogues. Book 1 was Timaeus. He did half of his second book, Critias. And he never did Book 3. And all the dialogues talk about the creation of world, the nature of man, and they also mention Atlantis.
And Atlantis, the story of it starts with Poseidon, the god of the ocean, who was given the island of Atlantis when the Greek gods divvied up everything. And he fell in love with a mortal woman, Cleito, and they had 10 kids, 5 sets of twin boys. And he remakes the island that he's given for her, surrounding it with moats, and it's just the ideal utopian land.
Right, and it's very circular in design. There's that island in the middle, there's a moat, there's a strip of land in a circle, another moat, another strip of land in a circle, and then more water. And no one could get to the island because, of course, there weren't ships at the time, so it was cut off from everything else. But over time, he gave the best part of this land to his oldest son, Atlas, and it grew to be an incredibly prosperous place.
They had bridges and canals and connected it to the outside world again, and just built it up so it was this splendid city with castles and everything you could imagine. Horse tracks randomly were a sign of a really great city, so be assured Atlantis had them.
But like with so many great civilizations, it became greedy and corrupt, and the Atlanteans began fighting wars and enslaving the people they conquered, and they even went after the great city-state of Athens.
And they finally got their comeuppance when an earthquake swallowed them in 9,600 BC.
Which in my notes after that I wrote BAM, so that's the end of Atlantis.
That's what happens.
So that's the story.
Yeah, that's the story. And to me, it sounds like a nice story about a civilization that has become too corrupt and too violent, which, from Plato's perspective, that's a pretty good warning for the city of Athens. Watch out, Athenians. Maybe we're also becoming too combative or too money-driven. But not everyone saw it as this allegory or myth.
Right. Some of his own students thought he was telling this truth, like Crantor, although Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, said he who invented Atlantis also destroyed it, trying to say, come on, this is a story.
So most people at the time accepted it as a myth, as a story that Plato had created.
A moral lesson, if you will.
But as time went on, people started to get more interested in this myth and trying to interpret it as fact and hunt for the lost city of Atlantis. And the idea that there was a huge continent that was past the Pillars of Hercules, which is the modern-day Straits of Gibraltar, which is where Plato placed Atlantis, was pretty unlikely as we got sophisticated or more sophisticated ocean mapping technology in the 20th century.
And learning how the plates worked and things.
Yeah, there probably wasn't going to be this enormous continent under the Atlantic Ocean. But that hasn't stopped lots of people from placing Atlantis pretty much anywhere in the world. We have recent candidates have been the Caribbean, South America, Antarctica, Ireland, French Polynesia, the Canaries, the Azores, Tunisia, West Africa, Sweden, Iceland, and Spain.
So basically, anywhere.
I'm sure there are other ones too. Basically, yeah, anywhere you can think of Atlantis.
But my favorite connection with Atlantis is the fascination the Nazis had with it, which is completely insane. And it starts with a Swedish guy named Olof Rudback, who said he had found Atlantis in Sweden, of all places, which, of course, has nothing to do with anything that Plato wrote.
The Pillars of Hercules?
Yeah, not so much. He said that the biblical Japheth came to Sweden after the Great Flood and then gave birth to Atlas, which perhaps you remember as Poseidon's son. No, it's someone else's, according to Rudback. And he came up with lots of rationalizations whenever his didn't make sense. For example, Sweden is nowhere near the Straits of Gibraltar. Well, perhaps that was a mistranslation then. And some of his research was picked up by a theosophist named Helena Blavatsky, who expounded on some of his stuff and added some more of her own.
I was excited to see her name in Katie's outline because she popped up in an article I wrote a few years ago about karma.
And secularizing it.
Yeah, she's actually considered responsible for secularizing karma in the West. So it's not just a religious thing, it's something that can be in a pop song.
Right, that we use somewhat incorrectly all the time. But this particular religion became popular when the Third Reich decided that Christianity had too much of a Jewish influence and maybe people should find some other religion to take part in. And her idea was that when Atlantis sank, some of the elite priests escaped from the city and they went to Shambhala, a mythical place in the Himalayas. And the Aryans, a completely new race, learned from the Atlanteans all of their wisdom, which she said involved things like inventing airplanes and explosives. Although I'd like to add the Theosophists also said there was an entire sunken continent named Mu, so perhaps they aren't the most reliable.
And they were waiting for the Aquarian Age, a time of enlightenment and brotherhood. So
it makes me want to sing the Age of Aquarius, but I'm not going to do it.
We're gonna avoid that.
So, of course, who likes this Aryan stuff? That would be the Nazis, especially Heinrich Himmler, who believed in all sorts of weird stuff, like glacial cosmogony, which was the idea that the whole universe was a conflict between fire and ice, basically since the dawn of time.
It's kind of James Taylor-esque.
It is.
I'm sorry, I don't want to compare him to the Nazis.
Sorry, James
It's not what
Taylor.
I was trying to do.
But he was in charge as part of the SS, as part of the National Heritage Institute, and so he had access to all sorts of scientists, scholars, and archaeologists who he sent out on missions to find Atlantis. We know for sure he sent people to Tibet to look for this place in Shambhala where perhaps the Atlanteans might have given their wisdom to the Aryans.
And that's a common theme in people who believe there was an Atlantis, that they passed on their wisdom to the great ancient civilizations. A lot of people have a hard time, or I don't know if it's a lot, some people have a hard time accepting that the megaliths in Great Britain were built, just people were inspired to build them and think that maybe the people of Atlantis taught them how. Pyramids, that's another popular example.
Anything like that, just saying, well, it's too advanced for the people of that time to come up with. It must have been part of the super race.
Anything that's too impressive, the Atlanteans must have helped out.
Yeah, they didn't believe that particular Tibetan city that they went to could have been formed by the people who lived there, which is insulting. But another Himmler associate named Edmund Kiss decided that it was in the Andes, and another one came up with some idea of polar shift and runes coming from the Atlanteans, and then Otto Huth decided it was in the Canary Islands. But this wasn't even about history, and that's the thing about Atlantis. People read what they want to into it, and for the Nazis, and especially Himmler, it was a way to figure out their racial superiority, giving this pseudo-scientific reason, or pseudo-historical reason, as to why Atlantis was so great, and so was the Aryan race.
Yeah, one of the theories that's a little more accepted than those, that aliens and teaching ancient civilizations,